the most talked about feature this year, the liquid glass effect. What do you think about this effect? You can definitely see a bit of change in the light, right? It does look a bit like gloss, but for people who like using the iPad, this isn't really a fundamental upgrade. I have an interesting story to share. 2 years ago, I had a very serious and heated argument with someone from Apple. At the time, he swore to me that the iPad would absolutely never become a Mac. But now, with this update, there are more windows for file management and similar features. With the addition of a pointer-style mouse, the iPad has taken a big step forward on the path to replacing the Mac. But I still want to say that the experience of using it is quite different from a Mac. After we spent some time deeply using this new iPadOS 26, we found that, as you can see, it has a ton of bugs and all kinds of lagging issues. But I think there's nothing wrong with its underlying concept. It's time for us to take a look at just how much impact a small software update can have on a major piece of hardware. Let's start by briefly going over the contents of this iPadOS update. The first and most notable feature is the brand new multi-window mode. After enabling the multi-window app mode in settings, you can now swipe inward from any of the four corners of the screen to freely adjust the size of the windows, just like on a computer. In the top left corner, you'll also see the familiar red, yellow, and green buttons from the Mac system, allowing you to resize or minimize windows as needed, along with other familiar operations. Previously, even with identical hardware, the iPad system could only open about 4 apps at once, any more than that, and things would get very complicated. But now, we've tested it for you on the latest 13-inch M4 iPad. You can open up to 14 apps at the same time, stacking them layer upon layer on the left and right. However, at this point, some system optimization issues will arise and it becomes extremely laggy. But at the very least, the iPad is now capable of doing this, of opening multiple apps simultaneously. Originally, I thought Apple would only enable this feature for the iPad Pro, but surprisingly, the iPad mini also received this update. We tested it for you by opening 4 windows at the same time. This is roughly how it looks on the iPad mini, and this is how it looks on the 11-inch iPad. In any case, there will be some overlap or obstruction, but if you ask whether it's usable, it definitely is. However, regardless of the size, I think if you want to get the best experience from the software update, you basically still need to connect an external monitor, especially for the iPad Pro, since its port uses Thunderbolt 4 or Thunderbolt 5 cables. As long as you plug it in, all the devices that could be used with a Mac before, like the monitor, speakers, microphone, and audio mixer, can now be perfectly compatible with this generation of the system. So honestly, I've already started trying to use an iPad with a separate monitor by itself at the office. Whether you're browsing the web, watching videos, or handling some daily work, there's really no difference compared to using a Mac right now. Aside from the fact that there are quite a lot of bugs, the second major update is the overall iPadOS UI. This time, the liquid glass effect is truly impressive. I think, especially for the iPad's entire desktop, this liquid glass look feels absolutely fantastic. Every time you pull or swipe, the entire menu and system have been completely restructured by Apple. You can really see effects similar to the refraction and dispersion at the edges of glass, and when you select the menu bar, you can also see a droplet-like liquid glass effect. Personally, I really enjoy using it. Let me show you a small detail. Look at how the bright edge here changes with the surrounding lights, so every time it interacts with your real environment. These super subtle details, although you might not stare at them every day, since it's something you interact with by hand, making it a bit more refined is always a good thing. But if you really want to talk about the most noticeable change in user experience with this software update, I think it's something that didn't exist before. For example, take the Notes app on the phone. I really like the Notes app on the iPhone. I don't know if anyone else is like me, but I really enjoy writing a little diary every day. Not much, but it helps organize your thoughts well. The biggest problem with writing on the phone before was that overall input was very slow. But I've always thought the iPad is the best device for a personal digital journal. You can use a keyboard to write your diary, input quickly, and then use the Apple Pencil to annotate pictures. It's just a really great tool for recording your life. This app is very popular with parents. Another very important update is that the iPad can now select audio input, which is especially useful for recording, particularly for people who do online meetings, online interviews, or podcasts. Now, there's a very effective feature. In the past, when you recorded an online interview, both your video and audio could only be exported from the software, which would be very blurry, and the sound would be distorted or even silent. But now, with iPadOS 26, if you connect a microphone, start a video conference, and turn on the local recording feature, the iPad will record a video file locally for you and embed your high-quality audio into it at the same time. This is really convenient for people who often do video podcasts or online interviews. It's a huge improvement. In theory, as long as both parties enable this feature, you can merge the footage and produce a high-quality interview. There's still a big difference between the two. The audio you're hearing now is the sound after downloading from the iPad meeting. What do you think of this audio quality? The audio you're hearing now is the sound recorded locally on the iPad. You can still notice a very obvious difference. This time, the iPad has also updated its Files app. Besides letting you change folder colors and add emojis, I think the real improvement is that the Files app can now display more file information. You can also right-click to access more settings for files, which is a very welcome addition. Besides that, another important improvement is that you can now have multiple windows running in parallel. For example, organizing files or quickly importing things is now much faster than before. So basically, you could say that the file management logic from the Mac has been nicely condensed and ported over to the iPad, which is definitely a big improvement over before and lays a solid foundation for professional applications. The only complaint I have is that the iPad still can't display transfer speeds, which means you still feel anxious when copying files. Another issue is that since the iPad itself only has one port, when dealing with large-scale file management tasks like copying materials or transcoding, you have to connect a high-speed expansion dock to use it. This, to some extent, undermines the iPad's inherent portability. So I think these are some of the useful new features, but after all, this is a system-level update, and I don't think it should be viewed in isolation. It needs to be considered as a whole. The fundamental question to answer is, if I'm a student and I want to buy a computer for the new school year, can the iPad serve as a computer? This is a question we ask every year, but this year, the answer is a bit more complicated. Indeed, with the mouse mode, it now has a pointer, more precise targeting, and even the menu bar, it's very much like a computer. But the problem is, now it's an iPad that looks more like a computer. And when you use some computer-like features, you'll notice certain things. Then this iPadOS turns back into an iPad again. Why do I say that? Let me give you an example. For instance, in our company, we use Faceshoe. A lot of our video planning is done using Faceshoe's cloud document. Now, if you want to insert an image on the iPad, you'll find that you need to first tap the plus sign, then tap Image, tap Album, select the image you want, tap Select Original Image, and then tap Upload. A total of 6 steps, exactly the same as on a phone. But if you do the same thing on a Mac, you just drag the image from your files into Faceshoe and the image is inserted automatically. It's just that one step, and you can even drag images around to arrange your layout. But currently, the iPad version of Faceshoe doesn't support direct drag and drop, and this really affects efficiency. With these apps that you're so familiar with on the Mac, you'll find that the iPad always trips you up on these little details. This is a problem that iPadOS 26 still hasn't solved. At times like this, the Mac is still a Mac, and the iPad is still an iPad. And it still feels like just an iPad. Finally, let's take a look at more professional scenarios like editing videos on the iPad. So, is it actually up to the task? When it comes to professional video editing software, it's basically just Final Cut, DaVinci, or some other domestic apps like Jinyang or Bijian. Overall, after using them, I honestly can't think of any real core advantages the iPad has over a computer. If I had to name one, multi-camera editing is probably where the iPad currently shines the most. Especially for 4-camera interviews, using your fingers to quickly touch and switch is indeed a bit more comfortable than using a computer. So, yes, it works. Dragging to find the shot you want, or even zooming in with your fingers also feels pretty good. But relatively speaking, once you have more than 2 Track 7 on a 13-inch iPad, as big as it is, using it still becomes quite a disaster. At the launch event, Apple mentioned iPadOS 26, which allows apps to run in the background, letting the system output at high power while you open another app to do something else. This is very important. For time-consuming tasks like exporting, downloading, or uploading footage, now the background can automatically help you complete them. However, after testing various apps, none of them actually have this feature, or the experience is not there yet. So I think this time, Apple, this system update is indeed very bold, and I really appreciate it. I'm not denying that at all. But it does pose a huge challenge for developers. Within this system framework, with both touch and keyboard, mouse support, how am I supposed to develop an advantage that other systems don't have? Right? This is actually extremely difficult. You need 2 ecosystems and 1 set of interaction. I really don't know how many manufacturers can actually pull this off, but at least for now, this update is here. The iPad Pro with iPadOS 26, M4 chip, 13-inch display, cellular data, and the maxed out 2 terabytes version if you buy that at this price, I still find it hard to convince myself to buy it instead of a Mac computer. But if you mainly want to use the Apple Pencil for drawing or taking notes, then the iPad still has its irreplaceable advantages. Anyway, I do think Apple truly has a beautiful vision for the iPad and is working towards it step by step. However, at this moment, things are still in a relatively chaotic transition phase. So I'm curious what you think about this iPadOS 26 update. Do you feel this update is significant for you? I think it'll still take another 2 years before it truly excites me. Maybe then I'll try using it as a computer. For now, it's still a bit lacking. So if you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and share it. It really helps us out a lot. Alright, see you next time.